Hello friends, welcome to yet another session on essay perspectives. The topic for today is harsh laws are at times better than no laws. As always friends, I have a personal appeal. My book Ethics, third edition of my book Ethics, Integrity and Aptitude has unfortunately been pirated. Pirated copies are of very low print and paper quality. I urge all of you to buy original. Original copies can be bought from the seller Arvind India on Flipkart and from the seller Affordable on Amazon. Thank you. Before starting, we can conceptualize this essay as being made of various components. Those components are: first we would introduce the essay, then we would delve upon essence of the topic, then we would discuss the ill effects of harsh laws, then ill effects of no laws, then we would compare which one is worse, then we would propose the best solution, and then we would conclude. Friends, as soon as I saw this topic, I was reminded of two important laws that we study in modern history. One is Rowlatt Act of 1919 and the second one is abolition of sati. First, let us talk about Rowlatt Act. As we can recall, Rowlatt Act was enacted in 1919 by British government in order to curtail or curb the upsurge of nationalism and revolutionary movements in India. So the main provisions of this Rowlatt Act was the Rowlatt Act empowered police to arrest any person without any reason, without any warrant. The police could just suspect a person of indulging in terrorism and they could just arrest a person, and that person could be continued in detention without being produced for trial before any magistrate. So thus these provisions were so draconian that it led to a lot of uproar, hue and cry across the country, lot of protests, finally culminating in the most unfortunate episode of pre-independent India, that is Jallianwala Bagh massacre. So friends, this Rowlatt Act was particularly harsh because its provisions denied or its provisions violated human rights of Indians. Its provisions violated the principles of natural justice. So thus this harsh law was in no way helpful to Indians. So don't you think just imagine the scenario between the India with Rowlatt Act and India without Rowlatt Act. Perhaps the India without Rowlatt Act would have been better than India with Rowlatt Act. That means harsh law would not have made India better than having no harsh law at all. Correct? So this is with regard to Rowlatt Act. Now let us talk about the another important legislation, that was the regulation that abolished sati by Lord William Bentinck. Correct? So here also, at that point of time, of course, now you may consider that act to not to be very harsh, but at that point of time, in that social milieu, this legislation, this regulation created consternation across Bengal societies. Why? Because anybody who aided or abetted the practice of sati could be brought to trial and could be tried by magistrate, and they could be declared guilty of culpable homicide. That means any person who attended funeral and that person also could be brought under justice, could be framed as guilty, could be framed as accused. So this sounded particularly harsh, okay, because even the legislation made that even if the practice of sati was voluntary, even then it was a crime, abetting or aiding sati. So this actually created consternation. This was regarded to be a very harsh legislation at that point of time. But friends, in this scenario, having a harsh law in the place of having no law is actually a better scenario, is actually better, because this act was trying to uphold the human right of dignity of every widow in the country. Correct? So thus, while Rowlatt Act created a scenario wherein it was better to have no law in the place of a harsh law. The regulation abolishing sati created a scenario of having harsh law being better than having no law at all. Correct? So thus there are different scenarios. In some scenarios harsh laws would work, in some scenarios having no law in the place of harsh law works actually. So this essay seeks to explore the possibilities and finally arrive at some conclusion. So we need to delve deeply into the topic first. So the essence of topic. So first, before we get into harsh law, no law, first we should know what is law. Law is basically a codified regulation. Codified is the key term. If a particular practice is approved or disapproved by the society without any codification, without any sanctity, then it is not a law. So law is basically a codified code of conduct, having legislative sanctity, and whose violation attracted penal provisions. So these are the three important features of any law. First, it should have been codified. Second, it should have the legislative backing. That legislative backing can be a backing by legislatures, popularly elected legislatures in democracies, or legislature mechanisms being created in autocracies. So whatever it is, but it should have legislative backing, and any contraventions, any violations of the provisions should have penal provisions attached to it. So thus these three are the primary characteristics of any law. So this is law. Then what are the objectives of law? See, ideally every law should strive to promote equitable society. How would law do that? Law should seek to achieve equitable society by preventing and proscribing the practices that would promote inequity in the society, and by encouraging, by promoting the practices that would promote equity in the society. Correct? The best example is Article 14 of Indian Constitution that seeks to promote right to equality. Correct? So the provisions of positive discrimination, the provisions of preventing discrimination against anyone on the basis of caste, creed, color, place of birth, etc. So these are the two provisions that actually what is the noble idea behind these two provisions? It is to promote an equitable society. So thus any law, the objective of any law should be to promote an equitable society. Then create free environment for realization of each one's potential. The law should create an ecosystem wherein everybody should be free, should be allowed to do experiment, should be allowed to take up any initiative or enterprises that would allow that person to realize his or her own potential. Correct? So the law should not scuttle, the law should not create a hostile environment that would prevent a person from realizing his or her own potential. Correct? I think so. The law should not prohibit a person, should not prevent a person from conducting scientific research that would go against the established principles. Correct? So I am always reminded of Galileo, who was charged with guilty of questioning the existing principles of church. Correct? So that is not the objective of any law. The law should create a free environment wherein one should be able to realize one's own potential. Then third one is, a law should be a source of right. Every law should should empower a citizen to have some right. So the right to life, right to education, a right to health, anything. So thus this should ideally be the objective of any law that is promulgated. Friends, after understanding the meaning and objectives of law, it is important for us to understand what a harsh law is. First, harsh law is any law that is embedded with the provisions that are immoral and harsh. The provisions themselves are immoral and harsh. A law that criminalizes attempt to suicide, don't you think it is immoral? A person, he is already depressed, a person is ready to sacrifice his life, and somehow by chance, by God's grace, he is saved. Now he needs psychological support, he needs counseling, he needs social support so that he can pick up the broken pieces of his life and put them together and lead a very happy and pleasant life in future. But instead of giving him or her the requisite social and psychological support, here is a law that seeks to brand that person as criminal, adds to his agony, and finally ruining his prospects of future life. Correct? So, thus, a law should not have immoral or harsh provisions. Okay? And another example could be the law that actually that has declared prostitution to be illegal. Of course, friends, as we know, in most of the cases, the women who resort to prostitution are from socially and economically weaker sections of the society. They resorted to that practice because they could not earn a living in any other dignified or respectable profession or occupation. Correct? So they are already exploited. So thus, those women are charged as guilty. They are put behind bars rather than giving them rehabilitation support. So thus all these laws are harsh and immoral. Correct? So thus any law that has immoral or harsh provisions embedded into it is a harsh law. Then second one is disproportionate punishment for violations. Friends, this is a very important thing. Violations, the gravity of violation should be carefully understood by the lawmakers, and the provisions have to be prescribed accordingly. Minor violations, first time violations should not attract disproportionate punishments. It is very, very, very important. So let us say there are, I think you can make sense out of what I am trying to tell you. A person, let us say, who has indulged in pickpocket cannot be charged with life imprisonment, right? So thus, every violation should be attached to a punishment which is proportionate to the violation itself. So it's very important for for the lawmakers to exercise their wisdom in ensuring this. Otherwise, if the law starts giving disproportionate punishments to trivial, insignificant violations, then that law can be dubbed as harsh. And the third dimension that would make any law harsh is absence of natural justice before deciding violation. Friends, you know what is natural justice? Natural justice essentially means a person who before being determined of guilty should be given an opportunity to express his opinions and views. A person shall not be declared guilty unless he is given an opportunity to be heard. So, thus, if you don't give him an opportunity, if you don't give him an opportunity to argue for himself or to engage a lawyer to argue for himself, then that is bad. That's a very harsh way of doing things. Friends, if you can recollect, in India, even after assassination of Mahatma Gandhiji, even the trial of Nathuram Godse is very, very famous. So even the person who was found to have killed the father of nation was given an opportunity to present his views. So that is why it is important for us to have natural justice being read into every law. Any law that allows anything without natural justice is very harsh. Then any law that acts as source of oppression is harsh. What do you mean by source of oppression? Law should not have provisions that would oppress the people who are subjected to it. For example, imposition of jizya tax on Hindus by Mughal rulers. Correct? So that is harsh. And imposition of exorbitant amount of taxation by British on Indian farmers was harsh, because that tried to oppress Indians. Correct? So then last, absence of independent judiciary for adjudication. Law, all of us are aware of this famous doctrine of separation of powers, right? So the law, the agency that promulgates the law should not be the agency that would adjudicate the violation of law. There should be an independent judiciary. Otherwise, if the agency adjudicating the law and the agency enacting the law are one and the same, then justice would never be done. So it is important to have an independent judiciary. If all these features are missing, then it is harsh law. Then once we have discussed about harsh law, then we have to discuss about no law. What do you mean by having no law? It may sound very simple, but actually having no law means having no prescription of standards of behavior in society. Correct? See, the government or executive wants to regulate a particular kind of behavior. Correct? So let us say the government wants to ban smoking in public. Correct? So if there is no such law, that means the government has not prescribed any standard of behavior. You can smoke, whether you smoke in public or not is not the headache of the government, and it is left to the free will of the society, free will of the public. In the absence of any law, the actions and behaviors of citizens are driven by biological instincts and social mores. Correct? So thus there is no let us say there is a person who is addicted to smoking. Correct? So he is in a cinema hall, his biological instincts prods him to light a cigarette, and smoke. He doesn't care, because no one has told him it is wrong or it is offense to smoke in a cinema hall. So he immediately lights up a cigarette and he starts doing. Correct? So he is driven more by biological instincts. He is not driven by any legal provision. Correct? Then similarly, social mores. Correct? In the absence of enactment of sati, abolition of sati enactment, the entire society was being driven by social mores. The social practice approved the practice of sati. So then society approved practice of sati. So then everybody was being driven by that. Correct? So thus, in the absence of any law, there is no standard prescription of behavior or action. So such behavior and actions are driven by biological instincts and social mores. Correct? So thus, having no law works only when the individuals are self-motivated. If an individual is a self-motivated, conscientious individual, then that individual would not resort to any immoral act. Correct? Otherwise, see, our biological instincts, our social mores need not be moral. Our biological instincts and social mores need not be equitable. So, our social mores and biological instincts need not be selfless. Let us say there is a childless couple. That couple is rich enough to afford best education, best future to the child if they beget one. But they are unfortunate, they have not got any child. So they see a child, okay, in some place. So they get their biological instincts say that they should pick up that child. I mean, of course, this child need not be orphan, friends. So they have seen some child somewhere. Then these parents think that we want to take the child, rear the child, and bring the child up. So in a civilized society, your biological instincts is saying go pick up the child. Okay, but can you do that? Should you do that? No, right? So thus, in the biological instincts and social mores need not be selfless. They need not be equitable. They need not be moral. So it is important for biological instincts and social mores to be conditioned by morality, to be conditioned by equity, to be conditioned by selflessness. This conditioning part is being done by law. In the absence of that conditioning, society remains a better place if and only if the individuals are self-motivated, which is not always the case. Correct? Then, what are the ill effects of harsh laws? We have decided what is a harsh law. Now it is important for us to discuss about ill effects of harsh law. First one is, there is always a simmering discontent underlying any promulgation of harsh law. No harsh law is accepted willfully. So this simmering discontent is very dangerous for any government, for any executive. So the first and foremost thing is that harsh laws tend to create simmering discontent amongst citizens. Second thing is civil unrest. Harsh laws are like ammunitions. They would lead to civil unrest. Friends, don't you think the laws that legalized racial segregation, laws that legalized apartheid are the reasons for revolutions, are the reasons for civil unrest? Thus, any harsh law has in its womb the fetus of civil unrest. Then unsustainable. Friends, it is not easy to sustain a harsh law because over a period of time this harsh law is met with so much criticism from within and without. I mean to say from inside and outside the government, so much so that it becomes very difficult to sustain that law. So over a period of time, in a democracy, if there is any such harsh law is promulgated, then obviously the citizens would overthrow that government in the ensuing elections, in the upcoming elections, and would bring back the government that would overturn the such a harsh law. Correct? So another ill effect of harsh law is harsh law promotes iniquity and disparity. So imagine, friends, imagine the scenario of having laws for exorbitant tax collection by British on India from Indian farmers. Don't you think that promoted iniquity? Don't you think that led to the pauperization of Indian farmers and Indian industries, adding to the riches of British? Correct? So thus it promotes disparity and iniquity. It's hard to enforce, friends, because the person who enforces the law is also a human being. Most of the times, harsh punishments cannot be enforced because the person who is supposed to enforce, he would actually listen to his consigns and would try to let go of. He would not even book cases. Correct? We know, right? So in so many cases, if someone is found guilty, for doing something, for committing some violation knowingly or unknowingly, so many times police don't book the case. So they would just shout at some person and they would just let him off. So it's very difficult to enforce a harsh law. Then misuse. This is the worst ill effect of harsh law. Because a harsh law can be used as tool of oppression. The harsh law can be misused to punish guilty, to punish a person who is against to the ideologies of the government. So, see, misuse of a normal law. Let us say an innocent is punished for a violation, for a trivial violation for which the penalty is not very severe or harsh. It's okay. But let us say if an innocent is falsely charged and punished for a violation whose for which penalty is very harsh and severe, then that is dangerous, right? Let us say someone has not done anything but circumstantially is found to have done that. So and you are bringing him and you are giving him the harshest punishment possible. By mistake of fact, you cannot, there is always a scope for mistake of fact and fact, right? So in such a scenario, if the law is not harsh, then it's okay. By his bad luck, he had to endure a small agony. But if the punishment is harsh, his life would get ruined, destroyed. Next, after discussing the ill effects of harsh laws, now it is time to discuss the ill effects of no laws. Correct? So, first thing is anarchy, chaos. Because in the absence of any standard prescription, everybody would do the way they want. Correct? So, as I quoted, let us say there is no ban on eve teasing. Correct? So, then everywhere there would be eve teasing, the society would be very toxic in the absence of any prescribed laws. Correct? So there would be continuous robberies, there would be continuous pickpockets, there would be murders, there would be sexual harassments, there would be kidnaps, there would be, everything. Correct? So thus it leads to anarchy, it leads to chaos. Then this is an interesting aspect, second one. No scope for collaborative efforts. Friends, always the moment we hear law, our mind thinks only about criminal actions. But the law can be, there are civil laws also, right? So, why do you think human beings are able to, the societies have flourished so much? Because human beings have the extraordinary ability to collaborate and cooperate with others. So, creating synergies. Correct? A person who is good at invention collaborates with the person who is good at marketing. Correct? So thus a person who is good at invention would invent something and he collaborates with another person who would market his products for himself, and that person would collaborate with someone else for something else. So what I am trying to tell you is, so persons with varied potentials collaborate with each other to create the best synergies possible. I think perhaps this is the single most reason why human societies have advanced so much. Correct? But what is the bedrock for this advancement of human societies, for this collaborative efforts? The bedrock is contractual obligations. Correct? See, I need money to do something, to invent something. I go to a banker and I execute a contract. I undertake to repay the loan and the banker gives me loan. Correct? What is the bedrock for this transaction between banker and this inventor? That is only the contractual obligation and the legal ecosystem that enforces contractual obligation, and any failure on the enforcement of this contractual obligation has some recourse. Correct? So that is the law. So in the absence of any such law, perhaps you would not trust each other, because you cannot because it is not always the case that only persons known to each other need to come together to do some collaborative enterprise. It's very rare. You have to deal with lot of unknown persons. How do you trust that person? So correct, right? For a banker, an entrepreneur, an inventor is an unknown person. Why would the banker trust and give loan? Because there are laws that would ensure that in the failure of that person repaying, there are mechanisms to enforce the contractual obligation. So thus any absence of law would neutralize this, would nullify this possibility of collaborative efforts. Next, exploitation. Friends, the laws seek to prevent a lot of exploitation. Imagine lack of labor laws. Then there would be no minimum wages. There would be no importance being attached to humane working conditions in factories. Correct? So there would be no social security benefits to laborers like PF, ESI, etc., etc. Correct? So this absence of laws would actually lead to exploitation. Then obviously no law would lead to flourishing of unjust societal practices like sati, so like female feticide, female infanticide, etc., etc., etc. Correct? Thus these are the ill effects of having no law. Now friends, we have discussed the ill effects of harsh laws and we have discussed the ill effects of no laws. Which one is better? Are harsh laws better than no laws, or is it not the case? From our previous discussion, we can safely conclude that neither is better. Correct? Why? See, also friends, looking from other perspective, though harsh laws have many ill effects embedded into them, but still they also serve a purpose at times. Correct? That is what we understood from the example of abolition of Sati Act. So harsh laws are better than no laws, okay, only when they embed just provisions and enforce them with the iron fist, and social mores are weakly enforceable. See, harsh laws are good. When are they good? Harsh laws are good only when they embed just provisions and those just provisions are enforced with iron fist, and when the social mores are weak enough to enforce such behaviors. Correct? Then only, in such a scenario only, harsh laws are good. But if harsh laws are embedded with unjust provisions, then the equation changes. No laws are better than harsh laws. No laws are better. The scenario of having no laws is better than having a harsh law is good when the latter, that means when the harsh laws embed unjust provisions and disproportionate punishments for violation without providing for natural justice. Correct? So that means universally you cannot conclude, okay? Universally you cannot conclude that harsh laws are always good, okay? Or you can conclude that no laws are always good. It is finally circumstantial. Correct? Then in the light of this analysis, then what is the best way forward? What is the best solution forward? The best prescription would be laws should have fair provisions, that means just provisions, and proportionate punishments. Okay? Then the laws should be inclusionary. Okay? So laws, the heads of the state, legislators cannot exclude themselves from the purview of law. So everyone should be subjected to law. Then there should be an independent judiciary. There should be a judiciary independent of the executive to adjudicate the violations of provisions of law. And there should be a scope for judicial review. Whenever a law is enacted, there should be an independent judiciary to verify, to review whether the provisions being promulgated in a new law are in consonances with some prescribed principles. Okay, maybe in the prescribed principles in the form of constitution, in the form of broad human principles accepted internationally, whatever. So there should be scope for judicial review. Then there should be appeal mechanisms. So let us say a person is found guilty of something. He should have an appeal mechanism. So he should have multiple opportunities to prove himself innocent. Then the democratic governance. See, the democracy is, the setup of democracy is so vivacious. The setup of democracy is so interesting that if any harsh law or no law, if anything that is actually creating a scenario of undesirable social practices or undesirable social status, then immediately there is pressure on the government to set it right, either through harsh law or no law, as the case may be. Correct? If the government fails to do that, then the populace, public, citizens, whatever, they have the right to overthrow that government and bring the government of their choice, so that such undesirable societal practices are prevented. Then specific mechanisms for scuttling executive abrogation of rights. I told you, no friends, the law should be a source of right, correct? So there should be specific mechanisms drilled into the laws such that executive should not be unilaterally abrogate those rights, correct? The provisions, okay, of enforcing fundamental rights in Indian constitution are the best example, and even the provisions clamping restrictions on the invoking national emergency, president's rule, etc. are the best example of how the mechanisms to prevent executive from abrogating the rights of citizens can be read into the constitution or laws, whatever. So thus this is the best prescription. Now it is time for conclusion, friends. From this elaborate discussion, we can safely conclude that laws should seek to promote equitable society, should seek to promote free environment for realization of everyone's potential. Whether this is done through harsh law or no law doesn't matter, so long as the circumstances promote equitable society and free environment for realization of one's potential. Okay, thank you friends. Meet you in the next session.